Hello, a very warm welcome, everyone. So many familiar and friendly faces. A warm welcome to Birdfoot's first event of the festival's 10th season, where we'll be exploring rhythm with the Jasper String Quartet, who I will introduce in just a moment. But first, I think most of you already know me, but for any who don't, I'm Jenna Sherry. I'm the artistic director of Birdfoot Festival. First, before we start, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of Birdfoot's sponsors, program advertisers, and all of you who have made 10 years of Birdfoot Festival possible. I'd especially like to thank the Selly Foundation and the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival Foundation for their support this year. Also really important is to recognize the incredible work of the entire Birdfoot team, especially Tracy Sherry, Birdfoot's executive director, and Gianna Sachere, Birdfoot's production manager, as well as all of the board members. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Michael Ball, who's the designer of all of Birdfoot's annual posters and this year's gorgeous, gorgeous program. Thank you, Michael. Since we're such a small, intimate group, I just thought I'd ask if anyone is not so familiar with Zoom. And I'll just point out a few very quick features. The all-important mute button is in the lower left-hand corner. And I'd like to ask everyone to keep yourself muted for the entire event, until after the quartet's final performance, where I'll ask everyone to unmute themselves so we can give them a round of applause. I'd also like to think most of you probably know where the chat window is. If you look at the bottom bar, you'll find the chat. And I'd like to encourage you to please put any questions you have throughout the event. Use this throughout the event and put any questions you have in the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go along. You'll also find links in the chat to the program booklet and information on the Jasper Chamber series, where you'll find more information on the quartet's performance on the 18th of March. Another thing you might find useful is raising your hand. If you find the reactions button on the bottom bar, you can raise your hand as one of the various reactions. And if for some reason you should lose connection during the event, just re-click on the original event and we'll let you back in. And if something goes wrong, you can call the Birdfoot Festival office and they will help you. And just for fun, if you're joining from somewhere outside New Orleans, I'd like to ask you to rename yourself. And you can do this if you hold your mouse over your photo, you'll see 3 little dots. If you click on that, you can rename yourself. And I'd love it if you, after your name, if you would tell us where you're joining us from. I think that'll be fun to sort of see the spread of places. Already looking at the faces, I know we have a spread of locations here. And for those listening on YouTube, well, very warm welcome. And please put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll try our best to answer those as we go along. If you're listening on YouTube, we would be really grateful if you would please consider making a donation as your ticket price. The Birdfoot Festival is run by people like you. And now it is a very big pleasure to introduce the members of the Jasper String Quartet. Jay, Karen, Andrew, and Rachel. Many of you will recognize Karen from Birdfoot Festival. And I would ask if you could all introduce yourselves. And for fun, so we can get to know you a little bit better, I wonder if you could say, if you didn't play your actual instrument, what instrument would you play and why?
Hi, I'm Jay Freivogel. I'm one of the violinists of the Jasper Quartet. And even though you would be hard-pressed to take my violin away from me, I think I would probably play the cello if I could choose a different instrument. Many of the people whom I love very much play the cello, and I've always loved actually falling asleep hearing the cello practicing.
Hi, I'm Karen, the other violinist of the group. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. If I did not play the violin, I think that I might try picking up the accordion. I find it to be a fascinating instrument, and I love the repertoire available to it.
And I'm the violist of the quartet. My name's Andrew Gonzalez. I'm super happy to be here. if I were to play an instrument that wasn't the viola, it would probably also be the cello. Because if I were to look at the past 3 years of all my solo repertoire I've played, probably about 60 or 70% of it are cello transcriptions. So
nice. And I am the cellist of the quartet. Hi, I'm Rachel. And I would have to say, if I could pick another instrument, as tempting as the violin is and the viola, I think I would pick the Barry saxophone, because you get to play some really loud, awesome music, and I really like playing bass lines.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And I also just wanted to mention, I think as I did before, that the Jasper Quartet will be playing a lot of this music, will be playing the full versions of the music we're exploring tonight on the Jasper Chamber Concerts online concert on the 18th of March. And you can find information about this at their Jasper Chamber Concerts website and also on the Birdfoot website. And I've seen some sneak previews of the video and I can highly recommend it, but you can make up your own decisions after tonight. So before we jump into the music, I wanted to share a few thoughts of my own about rhythm. I think for all of us, when we think about music, there's two words that come to mind right away. And one is melody, the sort of singable tunes, and the other is rhythm. And for me, and I think and I would even argue that might be more universal, rhythm is the most essential, almost the sort of elemental ingredient. We can feel something as music that has rhythm, but not melody. Imagine sort of percussion or drumming, or even someone sort of tapping something on a table. But it's much more difficult to hear something with melody, but not rhythm as music. And I'll challenge you to sort of explore that and try that on your own. But I've tried it, and if you sort of stretch melody out, if you try to take out the rhythm, it's actually quite difficult to do. So there's something elemental about rhythm, which is what we'll be talking about today. Now, all of you who are joining us are experts in rhythm because you are experts at being alive. Let me explain. No matter your musical comfort or expertise, you experience and hear and make rhythms every day. These rhythms communicate feelings, moods, energy levels, changes in circumstances, and all sorts of other information. So let's do an experiment to explore this a little bit and show you how I'm thinking. I'm going to say, and you can also actually, this is good practice if you want to use the chat. I'm going to say a type of rhythmical or physical activity. And I'm very curious to hear what feelings or moods come to mind with these particular physical rhythms. So if I say skipping, what comes to mind? You can just type it away and go for it. Any takers? What comes to mind with skipping? Oh, I'm not seeing, oh ho. There we go. We're finding the chat. Skipping for me is a sort of a joy. Yes. Something you don't end up sort of skipping unless you're really happy. Pauses, irregular jumping, energy. I love it. Yes. What if I say swaying? What does that evoke? What kind of mood or energy? For swaying. Calming, absolutely. Yes. What about walking? It's interesting also how much parallel your answers are. Walking, thought, something sort of something paced, something reflective. Pondering, energetic, and interestingly, walking can be either sort of steady or it can be energetic, maybe depending on whether you're going up a hill or down a hill. Seeing, I love it. Yes, walking with seeing. So here's a tricky one, breathing. Something we all do every day. It has a rhythm. We don't even think about it. The rhythm can change. Living. Earth Mother, yoga. Fantastic. And each of these sort of, connotates a certain state. And I'll give you one more, which is heart thumping. I'm seeing heartbeats, drums. Scary, yes, can be scary. Pulsing, introspection, maybe a quiet moment where you actually start to hear your heart. Excitement, fantastic. These are fantastic. Anyways, well, I think now you probably get what I'm talking about, this idea that rhythm is so much a part of our day-to-day experience. And my proposal for you today, and as we'll explore in the Dvořák, is that this physical experience of rhythm that we all have has a lot to do with how we hear and understand music. So now for some music. Jay, do you want to put on the music? We're going to hear the first 3 minutes of the Dvořák quartet that we're going to talk about. And then and then I'll let Karen take you into it.
Okay, it's such an amazing piece. Listening to that after being primed to think about rhythm is, it really is a great place to start with this piece.
Karen, I'm so sorry. Can I just jump in and ask whether how the sound is for everyone who's listening? You can maybe put it in the chat. I heard from 1 or 2 people who had it a bit distorted, and a bunch of others said it was good. So just maybe give us a quick feedback here so we can improve it. But I think that would just be good to know. Great. Karen, back over to you.
Great. When I listen to that first part of the Dvořák, it makes me think that there are 2 main types of rhythm that we're hearing, which are repetitive rhythms and gestural rhythms. Repetitive rhythms can evoke some sort of physical motion, like the ones that Jenna was discussing at the beginning of our presentation, such as walking and skipping. And gestural motions reflect some sort of a gesture. So these rhythms often control the pace and the feeling of the music. A rhythm can make us feel like we're moving quickly, rapidly, or slowly, even jauntily. A gestural rhythm will evoke some sort of gesture like a sigh, if you play a long note after a short note, or it could even make you think of an announcement.
Yeah, so let's hear how some of these rhythms come up in Dvořák. We'll start at one of the beautiful melodies that first is presented in the violin part, which goes here.
Wow. On its own, this melody is so sweet and relaxed, I would say. Bit of sighing or even a sort of languid mood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really neat how Dvořák enhances the character by putting along with it one of these repetitive rhythms. And one of those rhythms is in my part. It sounds like this. And that sort of just creates like a comforting, like I like to think of it as a little cuckoo, cuckoo, like kind of just comforting, rolling us along with this nice melody.
Yeah, and that cuckoo fills in all of my long notes. So, I mean, you can listen to my beautiful notes, or you can hear how it interacts with the repetitive cuckoo in the cello. So here's how that goes.
Wow, it's interesting. Oh, a little bit of feedback. Listening to those two parts together now, I noticed that the cello adds a lot of sort of a structure that the melody alone didn't have. And yet I also feel like the cello part becomes a sort of, almost a sort of background scenery, which the melody is interacting with. So there's sort of another layer going on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dvořák adds yet another rhythmic layer in the second violin and the viola part, which is an exchange of a repetitive rhythm. It goes like this.
And when you play this, Andrew, what does this extra rhythm add to the melody?
This extra rhythm definitely adds energy. Perhaps it's the energy of a more upbeat mood. But let's listen to all the parts together and see what you think. Please feel free to write your thoughts in the chat.
Great. I will share the video. One moment. Oh, little hitch here. Give me a moment. And here it is. Before we go on, Jay and Rachel, can you describe where this passage we just listened to falls in the sort of narrative of the whole movement?
Yeah, this whole piece is about 40 minutes long, but this comes just as we're casting off in the main section of the first movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's look at another place with repetitive rhythm. So in this part, we have some bubbly triplets that kind of percolate up through the quartet, and it sounds like this in my part.
Here, I'll be Andrew. I'll play Andrew's part here. Is that all right, Andrew? All right, here we go.
Okay, so
I put my viola on. Here we go.
Have these triplets.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens here is then the violins come in and we add an extra little melodic dogged 8th note, 16th note, which sounds. So that goes along with these triplets. So let's hear how these go together. And you'll notice that this line then turns into a melody. So listen to how we have these repetitive triplets buoying back and forth, and then how the melody kind of emerges out of it. Shall we play it together?
Sure.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. This is such a different feel from the first passage you demonstrated, which had the, a sort of sense of energy and expectation, but this sort of long, expansive melody. And now we have this sort of energetic, skipping, very active. It's a completely different mood. And it's funny, I remember the first time I listened to your recording that you sent, and this part just hit me as such. I have to say, I was having a sort of a slightly down day, and it totally lifted my spirits.
Yeah, it's a great spot, and 2 reasons why that happens. One is because, remember, the inner voices have on that first one, which is this nice 8th note melody. So then you start having triplets. All of a sudden, things start to spring to life a little, And
Fantastic.
Also, the second reason is that Dvořák right here writes in tempo and poco poco più animato. So gradually a little bit more life as we go. So that's exactly right. I'm glad that came across. That's what we were trying to bring through.
Wonderful. Shall we listen to the clip of the whole thing?
And now our final repetitive rhythm has a much calmer character, sort of rocking us along. And in my part, it sounds like this.
Yeah, and I had this nice little lullaby.
And my part adds a different sort of a texture, little sparks of faster notes. So oftentimes I'm playing 4 notes inside 1 note of J or Rachel, but sometimes even a 5th note is folded in. So.
And I'm curious, Karen, when you're playing this part, what is the feeling that you think this layer adds? Because I was expecting, when I saw the 5s, I was expecting it might add a bit of agitation. But I'm thinking now in the way you're playing it that maybe you hear it in a different light.
Yeah, I like to think of this part as adding sort of like a fantastical little spark in there. I think there's something about when this melody comes with these repetitive rhythms underneath that are kind of taking us into a fantasy land.
Fantastic. And the other thing that strikes me in hearing those 2 textures right now is how the rocking sort of leans backwards, whereas the rhythm Karen's playing almost sort of urges us forward. So in a way, these 2 layers have contradictory feelings.
Yes.
And on top of these really amazing layers is this gorgeous viola melody. It goes like this.
Have you heard that before?
Yes, we have actually. It was in the violin melody. Dvořák's quartets always have a way of showcasing the viola's warm and mellow line, and here you hear just that. But listen to the way Dvořák's first note of the motive falls down to give this sense of longing. And then... So when I'm playing this, I think of this music showing a sense of relief from this really intense music prior. Let's listen to now to how the lower pitch of this viola and the very different rhythms in this the other instruments change the overall effect.
Fantastic. So we'll listen to another video clip. And apologies, we're not actually playing you the intense passage that comes before that Andrew's talking about. So this will be something to sort of remember and look out for when you listen to the whole thing at the end.
Don't set the scene.
Exactly. Wonderful.
Yeah, now let's listen to some other rhythms that fall into the gesture category. So I have this big gesture that you'll hear when we hear the whole movement. It goes. So this really strong 3-note kind of motive. If you remember, it's actually exactly the same notes in our very first repetitive rhythm example where I was playing and Jay played. Yeah.
We're agreeing so well there, aren't we?
Mm-hmm, we're agreeing. So then I take this kind of repetitive rhythm and Dvořák turns it into a gestural rhythm by making the notes slightly longer, putting accents on them, and also making the dynamic much louder. So when the cello comes in with this, it's signaling a really big change in the music. And also, everyone in the quartet, we all start kind of seeing this at each other and having this kind of argument, a little bit of an argument about where it goes.
We like to argue through our instruments. Yeah, so it goes back and forth like this. Let's play our part. Yeah. We're friends in real life, but we argue through our instruments.
That's right.
It's fantastic. It's interesting listening to this gesture. I thought I had, and how it comes from the repetitive rhythm. I thought I should say that actually this, and maybe you can, when we listen to the full thing, the line, we've sort of differentiated rhythms into repetitive and gesture, but there's places where that line blurs a little. But for myself, I tend to think of gestural rhythms. They often sort of act as musical punctuation. They might tell us we're sort of at the beginning of a music or announce a new section. But they also can have another role. And actually, this one you just played for me, something about this rhythm reminds me of another very famous gestural rhythm that goes da-da-da-dim, da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
We would call a motive. Sorry, go ahead, Jay.
Exactly. What you're getting to is this idea of motive, this small cell, this small building block. And Dvořák, just like Beethoven, just like many composers, is a real master at developing these motives, transforming them as we go through. I just want to show that our last example here is the very opening melody that you hear in the violin part. And you'll notice that there are actually possibly three different little motives in here that will pop up throughout the rest of the piece. So it goes, you might remember it's... Now, first of all, these last three notes sound quite familiar. And, right? So that little 3-note cell is everywhere. Everywhere.
Incredible. Can I just jump in and say that little 3-note cell actually comes from the end of a phrase. And then when you start arguing, it gets turned into a start of something.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's one of the great, it's a wonderful thing about great composers and great classical music or music in general is when you have this development. You know, everything is constantly changing. You rarely get something exactly the same twice. So we have that ending part, right, which we've talked about how it goes. We also have this wonderful sweep at the very beginning. You know, and it has this great sense of, I don't know, motion. Here I am. Yeah. Another aspect that's in here is a little flourish. He gives us, if you count these with me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? Remember, Karen has this, that 5-note little spark, magical spark. That comes right at the beginning. Right? And so these 3 all put together, we have the sweep. Now a little show off motive. And that is our little building block. 3 little building blocks that then spur the entire movement.
Something
Wonderful. Oh, sorry, Rachel. I was just noticing in the chat that if someone said that they feel that this gives a sense of uplift, which it absolutely does, and that fantasy Karen was talking about in the 5. And the other comment I saw was that someone remarked that they had always loved Dvořák, and now they realize it came from the rhythms. And that's exactly the feeling I started having when we started preparing this. So absolutely. Thank you for those comments. Rachel, to you.
Yeah, sure. So that motive, that the sweeping melody that they just played, it actually starts off in the cello. And there's another device that Dvořák uses to change the feeling of it, which is that they're written in different meters. So when I first play it in the Adagio opening, the meter is in 6/8. So can you demonstrate?
Sure, yeah. So when we're talking about meter, we're talking about time signature or number of beats we have in the bar. So 6/8 means we have 6 eighth notes in the bar, and they go. Bar and I conduct along while you're playing, okay. And feel free to sort of tap along, or you can just watch where my hand is going.
Why don't you give 1 bar for nothing?
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Now let's just do real quick before we talk about the character of that. Can we play with the one when I play it?
Sure. So when Jay plays it, it's written in 4/4. So there's 4 quarter notes in each bar. So we would count it like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right? So the difference between 6/8 and 4/4, I'm sure you can feel it. Of course, the actual tempo, we're changing how quickly we're going. But 4/4 has a little bit more of a sprightly, upright, uplifted kind of a character. And the 6/8 at the beginning, the beat 6 is divided into 2 sets of 3. Okay? Whenever we're in music and we have what's called a compound meter, or a meter divided into sets of 3, it gives this sense of lilt, this little sense of dance, a little bit of a flow. Yeah? Yeah, 6/8 time dancing. Exactly. Exactly right.
That's fantastic to hear you demonstrate that. And when I hear you play these 2 different versions of the motive, I kind of feel like I'm hearing a character. This sort of musical idea is almost like a character or a protagonist. And I feel like I'm hearing it in 2 very different emotional states or energies from the beginning to the other.
And one of the most important things for us as musicians is, okay, we take and interpret dots and lines that are on a page, but we ultimately have to turn them into an emotion, something that we feel we can communicate to our audience, communicate to ourselves, understand what the composer is saying to us. And so that's exactly right. All of these clues, the meter it's in, the rhythm that it's given, the articulations that it's given, those are all little clues that the composers give to us that we then synthesize and bring out into the world.
Fantastic. Can we hear how this all goes together in the opening? So now we're going to listen to the slow opening that opens the entire quartet before we get to the allegro, which is the section with that sense of uplift. And Here it is. Fantastic. Karen, let me hand it over to you to introduce the next part of today.
Wonderful. We're going to move on now to the music of Florence Price, who was a composer that was very influenced by Dvořák, and we're going to be talking a little bit about her first string quartet. Price approaches rhythm in her own unique way in her string quartet, and when you hear it, you'll hear repetitive rhythms and gestural rhythms as we talked about in the Dvořák, but she also plays around at the beginning of the piece with how we organize rhythm in larger beats. So let's start by listening to the opening of her first string quartet. It's a wonderful piece. I love that opening melody. When we were talking about the Dvořák, Jay and Rachel were talking about the meter of the music. And another way to think about the meter is kind of the natural swaying that you might have when you're listening to the music. So when I listen to that piece, I inevitably start swaying back and forth and I think, yum, ba, da, 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 yada. And then inside that swing, I might start thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then we feel that this is the meter emerging, that we're in a triple meter. And I'm going to go ahead and share the score with you so that you can see how Price wrote this out. We can see here, if you look where my cursor is, that the meter is in 3/4. So she sets up this long line with this triple meter, but then very early on in the piece, in just the second line of the score, she changes the meter to 2/4, which is quite unusual for this time period and for this style of writing. Usually there would be a large section in 1 meter, and then if you're going to change meters, you play in that meter for another large section. But she just kind of takes a left turn into 2/4 and then goes right back into 3/4. And it has a very interesting effect on the music. I thought we could practice our meter changes a little bit by counting 2 bars of 3/4, alternating with 3 bars of 2/4, and clapping on what we call the downbeats. So it would be something like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So join in as you're feeling comfortable, and we'll.
And I'll just add, the math whizzes out there will notice that 2 groups of 3 and 3 groups of 2 both add up to the same thing.
All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So you can sense that she's kind of keeping you on your toes with these meter changes. So Jay is going to play this melody for us with Rachel clapping along and counting the meter. And let's listen out for how this meter change affects the feeling of the music.
All right, here we go.
All right, so I'll give you 2 bars for
I
nothing.
think we can all clap along, don't you think? I
Yeah,
think you can
I
clap
think
along
so.
at home. Yeah,
Let's do
it.
it together. Okay. Ready? 2
I'm ready.
bars
Okay.
before you start. Okay, ready?
Let's go.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Can we do it one more time?
Mm-hmm.
I almost got lost. I almost got left behind. Here we
Okay,
go. Okay, here we go.
We'll do it again. 2 bars. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Here it goes.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you, Jay and Rachel. That was wonderful. I like to think of it as, we're going along in this beautiful, expansive melody, and then there's all of a sudden this little slide, and we just go onto the playground for a little bit. Sorry, I have young children. My mind is there.
It's fantastic. Thank you. It's an incredible, shocking. And the other thing is I'm noticing is she also, as well as changing the feeling of the music, she changes the harmonies a bit. So I almost feel like there's a little bit of a distraction, and then we sort of come back to the dance. And I noticed that someone commented in the chat that they never realized before how layers of rhythms can sort of create mixes of emotions. And someone else commented that isn't that how emotion works, that they're rarely sort of pure, but you might have a sort of a bittersweet or a mix of different things. And I think you're absolutely getting what we're trying to sort of pull apart now. And when you listen to the whole piece, you'll hear even much more. I wanted to ask if we have any particular comments. You can put them in the chat. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 comments before we listen to the performance, and then we'll take a few more minutes to take more questions after that. Are there any urgent or immediate questions now? And if not, I will introduce the performance. So before we get to the performance, we will be listening to this first movement of Florence Price's string quartet in its entirety, which is how long quartet? Can you tell me more or less? A few minutes long?
It's about 5.5 minutes.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then we'll be listening to the first movement of the Dvořák quartet that we were talking about in its entirety. And that's about 8 or 9 minutes. So it's about 15 minutes of music in total. And while you're listening, I want to encourage you to listen how the changes of rhythm advance the sort of feeling of narrative or story. And in particular, I think it's interesting to listen to where that rhythm has come from. In a quartet, the cellist is particularly important in sort of setting this feeling of mood. So I would particularly encourage you to listen to how the rhythm in Rachel's part sort of drives the music or really affects the entire feel of it, almost at this sort of gut level of the deeper frequencies. The other thing I would encourage you to listen to is how the instruments sort of interact through rhythm, and whether this becomes a sort of conversational interaction or an argument, as we hear in Jay and Rachel's part, as you heard earlier. And there's also, or a sort of imitation. And then you can sort of contemplate what kind of conversation, what kind of argument, or what kind of imitation. What is the imitation? What effect is that having on this feeling of narrative or story? And the one other idea I'll give you to listen for are places where the group is actually completely unified in rhythm. We didn't demonstrate any of these, but I think you'll hear them. And where these come in the piece, and do these feel like important musical or structural moments? And I leave this up to you to listen, interpret, and understand for yourself. And now we'll turn it over to the performance by the Jasper Quartet. And I want to encourage you all, as soon as the performance finishes, to unmute yourselves, and we will give them a huge round of applause. So now the Jasper Quartet. Wow, thank you so much, Jasper Quartet. That was absolutely stunning and gorgeous. And I was certainly hearing it very differently after all we've just discussed. So now we will open the floor to questions. And I'd like to suggest you can either, if you have a question, can you raise your hand and then we'll call on you and you can ask it live. Or if you prefer, you can also put it in the chat. See. I'm looking if anyone, if you don't know, if you can raise your hand by clicking on reactions, which is down at the bottom, and then there's a little raise hand button, or you can just do it on the screen. No questions. Surely there must be
I'm thinking, I promise, Jenna. Thank you.
There were such wonderful comments. I wanted to ask the quartet how you chose this Dvořák quartet. There are so many fantastic ones and a lot that aren't played very much. And I'm wondering what drew you to this one?
We liked it. You know, actually, you come across music in all sorts of different ways. And this piece, I first came across it, and for my colleagues, it was all different, but I first came across it working on it, coaching a group at a summer program playing it. And through coaching them, I listened to a bunch of recordings in preparing for it. And it's, you know, it's a great piece. There's so many amazing string quartets written. We would love to play them all. You can't play them all, but it's a great piece. It's a great piece to play. Yeah. And actually, it's super hard. It's super. Just in case, just to clarify, A flat major is not a great key to play in, and it's very difficult for intonation, and it's wonderful to work on. And yeah.
It sounds just gorgeous and lush. And which leads me to a little pitch. I have to say, I was really hoping we would have time to talk about and explore the second movement of this quartet, because it's absolutely in line with this sort of theme of the life-giving energy of rhythm. And it's one of the most charming waltzes. And Dvořák also uses the exact same device that Florence Price does of going back between beat groups of 3 and groups of 2. And it's so charming. So if you have a chance to hear the concert on the 18th, that might be my favorite movement. Michael has a question.
Hey, Jenna. And Jasper. I'm just wondering, was there a reason you chose these two pieces for today's program? There seemed to be a lot of rhythmic and harmonic and other parallels between them. They're kind of similar, but also kind of different. Does anybody want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I can talk about that. So these two pieces are both on this program that we made for our concert series, Jasper Chamber Concerts. And, you know, Florence Price and Dvořák are two composers who are very connected. Florence Price was very influenced by Dvořák and his ideas of incorporating folk melodies and all that kind of stuff into music. And just when we were trying to think about how to make an interesting program, I think we had a sense that these two pieces would really speak to each other, that they had a lot in common, but it would also bring like a wonderful variety to the program.
Absolutely. I think Karen answered it. Are there other questions about rhythm, about anything else for the quartet in particular? Is there anyone based in the Philadelphia area? Of course, the quartet. Other questions? Not so many today. I guess we must have.
Yeah, Elfie.
Elfie.
I'm just wondering if you can think of other composers that leap to mind who were doing particularly interesting things with rhythm, or where rhythm is really the kind of essence of what they do.
I think there are a lot.
Everybody's using rhythm, but
yeah, I mean, it's kind of inescapable. And I think in any piece you play, that's just a driving force of what's happening. But if you're looking for like more innovative ways of using music, I think that's kind of, it goes hand in hand with the trajectory of music moving through time. So now, like, contemporary composers, I think, are really pushing the boundaries with what can happen with music, with meter changes and uneven groupings, different time signatures and meters and tempos all happening at the same time. If you want to be super adventurous, you could check out the music of Elliott Carter, who he does a lot of groundbreaking writing with rhythm. I'll let somebody else talk maybe now. Sorry.
It is true what Karen said, that basically rhythm is just getting more and more complex as we go, and sometimes that manifests itself in meter, as in they're feeling very irregular numbers of beats in the bar, or changing numbers of beats in the bar, and sometimes that manifests itself in the number of subdivisions we play. So we talked about how Karen and I have a quintuplet. We have a set of 5. Karen and I we were working on a piece recently. I think it was this piece by Paul Wianco. You could check this piece out too. Paul Wianco, Lift. He does some cool things with rhythm. But you play groupings of 5s, and both Karen and I had the feeling like, wait, this doesn't feel odd enough. Are we playing it correctly? Like, because when you're first learning music, you think of you learn 2s, 3s, 4s, 6s, and 8s. You know, and like you don't deal with 5s, you don't deal with 7s that much. Maybe occasionally a 9. And just, you know, as you play more and more pieces, then all of a sudden 5s they just become normal. And 7s, then all of a sudden 7s become normal. And then you start adding interesting rhythms against one another. So one of the rhythm, as Karen said, is just a driving force of music. And it's the complexity, the layers that you get inside all of these pieces. That's the reason we all keep coming back for more, because every time you listen, every time you explore, you find something new.
It looks like, Andrew, you wanted to demonstrate something.
I'll just, I was just thinking of playing the rhythm that we were all thinking about. It was funny, we actually took a 5-minute break and went to separate rooms in Jay's house and just practiced this one rhythm that goes with the 5 and the 4 it goes. Originally we thought it went, but the 5 is over this 3 beat, so it's technically, and it's really cool because there's this, we can do a whole talk on this, but there's this quarter note beat in Rachel's part that just sounds so groovy, and I've kind of been having that rhythm in my head while I'm walking down the street the other day. That's been great. So.
It's fantastically jazzy and jaunty. You might have just said this, but is there a place we can hear you playing this? Has this been on one of your previous recent concerts?
It's going to be on a program that we're putting together for the Freer Gallery that I think is happening in April. Is that right? Yeah.
One piece, if you want to hear some interesting kind of other rhythmic things that you can see a video of recently, is a piece called Chapter 1 by a composer named Reynaldo Moya. He actually just wrote it for us. We just premiered it in February, virtually. But the last movement of it is very striking in terms of, he gives this ostinato to Karen that's a group of 5, and he's constantly shifting what we're playing on top of it. And I think it's a really kind of magical way of using rhythm. Sometimes people use rhythms that go against each other to create tension. Sometimes it's magic, sometimes it's speed, slowing down, that it can be used for any number of characterful reasons. But yeah, Chapter 1 by Reynaldo Moya. Wonderful.
We have a question from YouTube, and then we probably have time for maybe 1, maybe 2 if they're quick left. So get your questions ready if you've got any, and I'll put this to the quartet. So we were talking about, there was a question about the connection between Dvořák and Price, and there's a question from YouTube about the tensions inherent there, or if they are. Dvořák, of course, spent time in the US, and used a lot of, the question says, used a lot of musical tropes of indigenous peoples and African-American musical cultures. And Florence Price was, of course, African-American. Do any of you want to talk a little bit about the relationship with that and Dvořák's sort of championing of American music and how that relates to Florence Price?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and it's a very salient point that we are grappling with these days. I think I haven't personally read anything about tension between Price and Dvořák. I am not an expert in any means on that subject. I do think that Dvořák's, his ideas about how to incorporate the music of indigenous peoples, they were ideas that were formulating at a very different time. And I think we have just a very different view on that now, and that it's important to be sensitive to that and keep that in mind when we're programming. I think that's the best that I can say to that.
It's a good question, and it's a good answer, Karen. And I think one other thing that might be interesting to put in, some of you who may have attended Birdfoot's 2019 concert will remember that we played some of Florence Price's songs alongside Dvořák's American Quartet. So actually kind of a similar pairing, but different works. And one thing that's interesting about Dvořák is that he was experimenting with using motives and tropes and rhythms from Czech folk music as a way of sort of creating a Czech national style. And because of his activity and identity in this area, he was actually invited and appointed director of a brand new conservatory that started in New York that was called the American Conservatory of Music. I think I'm getting the name right. And this is why Dvořák came to the US. It was to become head of this new school of music. And part of his mission and part of the reason he was appointed was to sort of raise a generation of composers who could help find and pioneer a sort of uniquely American classical music sound. And important to remember, this was shortly after the Civil War. And so it was a time of sort of great optimism, energy, a great sort of optimism and energy in music education and sort of everywhere, and with a lot of sort of hope for reconciliation. Now, as we all know, that was not such a smooth path. And interestingly, Florence Price was not one of Dvořák's students, but was kind of represented the next generation of composers. And Dvořák was also very passionate about advocating the music of African-American spiritual traditions and also Native American music traditions, and freely worked this into a lot of what he did. The American Quartet is one of these pieces, and this quartet we hear tonight was written later, but there's another piece, a bass quintet, that is also known to come out of these same inspirations for Dvořák. That's what I know, if anyone else wants to reflect on that. Any last questions? All right. Well, I think I will wrap it up now. A wonderful and huge thank you to all of you, the entire team that made this happen. All of you, we are missing dearly being with you in person, but I have to say that seeing all of your faces has brightened my day and my week considerably. And I want to invite all of you to join us in 2 weeks for the next event, which will be with the Argus String Quartet, exploring a fantastic piece of music by a contemporary composer, Catherine Balch. And I've gotten a preview of this. And for those of you who might have some reservations about contemporary music, I can assure you, you need have no such fear. This beautiful piece called Drip Music is written about the idea of taking soft, delicate, sort of ephemeral everyday sounds and exploring when they become music. And the musicians use sewing thimbles to make a variety of really magical sounds with the instruments. And I will let you in on a secret, which is that the composer might even be joining us. So for any of you that are curious, I really encourage you to sign up for that. The registration is now open. And of course, before we finish, I am yet another reminder that the Jasper Chamber concerts will be concert with the full versions of these pieces will be on the 18th, and I hope to see some of you there. And a very warm welcome, also a very warm thank you to all of you who have made this season of Birdfoot possible. It's very exciting to be launching the 10th season. So we'll see you in 2 weeks and have a great night. Bye.